mission now. I'm on a mission now. I'm on a mission now. I'm on a mission now.
Cool, how's it guys? Dre here. Today we're going to be tying a Bob Popovic classic using bucktail. We're basically going to be tying a smaller version of this guy right here. That's the fly we're going to be tying. Basically with this video, what we're trying to show you is, bucktail. Everybody really was looking for long bucktail, beautiful long soft stuff. It's not so easy to find, not so easy to get. So what we're going to do is try and just show you a trick on how to create a hell of a lot of length with bucktail using Bob Popovic's mono extension. This is primarily a baitfish pattern, can be used for squid patterns and everything like that. Hollow flies, are using a lot of hollow fly tying techniques, and you can mold this to pretty much any baitfish you want. Specifically useful when you're trying to create big profiles and big baits anywhere in saltwater and in freshwater too. So we'll try to show you a few little tricks. Hopefully they help you out and demystify a little bit of the bucktail enigma, and hope it helps. Have some fun. So we're going to get started. Take that out the way. So main thing to start, what we're going to do is we're going to be tying on a piece of straightened mono. This is 100 pound, I believe, 100 pounds soft. When you're starting out, it might be easier to tie on something quite a lot heavier just because it's a lot stiffer. So it does make it a lot easier. And then as you go on and get used to how to tie this stuff, you can move on to a softer one, which in the end is going to give you a lot more movement. So you get a lot more movement at the back of the fly rather than it being super stiff. So when I first learned these, I started tying on 130 pound Hard Flouro, which is super stiff, does make tying it very easy. But I've moved on to soft 100 pound mono, or you could use 80 pound Hard Flouro or 60 pound even. Stiffer is easier, but yeah. So we're going to start off. First thing I do is you straighten the length of mono or fluoro. Do that by tying it around something straight and then boiling it. You can shove it into a tube, a whole bunch of lengths of them, shove them into a tube, boil it for about 5 minutes, and then dump it into ice water or into the freezer for a bit, and they should come out fairly straight. So what I'm going to do is just, first of all, just ball the tag end a little bit. That's just to prevent my thread from slipping off that back end. A couple of important bits I'm tying with 50 denier nano silk. So it's a very thin, very strong thread. You'll see as we go through the fly the reason why I prefer this to tying with thicker threads, mainly because it's very strong, but also because it's so skinny, you can use that skinniness to bite down onto the bucktail, which can then control your flare. As you're going through your fly, you're wanting to build the right profile and shape, so you're wanting the bucktail to flare at different points or different sort of openings to give you that nice teardrop shape. So what I like to do now, it's not possible with all vices. I'm tying on a J vice, which is great. So what I actually like to do here is adjust the vice so that it's in a vertical position like that. That enables me to lock it in a little bit, and it just points the vice up so I can actually hang on to that piece of mono in between tying onto it. So a lot of this is done tying in hand. If you're tying with very stiff mono or fluoro, you can actually, in some cases, tie it in the vise. Oh, try not to hit your vise. So you just want to get your thread started, and I'll tighten this up a bit. So basically, with the vise in that position, it just makes life a little easier getting the holding the mono. So bucktail wise, as I said, we're going to be basically tying this colorway, or peppermint chin. I'm going to start off with as long as possible, the longest I can find. What I want for this is the fairly long straight stuff. You want to start fairly sparse at the back end. So I'm going to pull off a section of bucktail as long as I can find. I want fairly soft here ideally. trim it off as tight to the skin as you can. Now what I'm going to do is, bucktail's very much like deer hair in that obviously it's hollow, but the more you want it to flare, the better it is to clean all these butt ends out of any kind of fluff or anything like that. I'm not trying to remove too much of these lengths, you know. So you're wanting a, probably take a few more of those out of there, the shorter ones. What you can do is just twist, pull. So getting this started is a little bit tricky, it takes a bit of practice, but trim the butt as much as you can. So what I'm going to do is now, basically I'm using that piece of mono as my hook shank. So I'm going to, my fingers are in the way, I apologize. I'm going to do 3 loose wraps with this nano silk. I found that that's about the best rather than 2 or 4. 3 seems to be the right one, which holds it in place but still allows you to turn the bucktail and twist it around. So what I want to do now is get in there with my thumbnail, fingers, and just try and push that bucktail 360 degrees around the mono. Sometimes it helps to just release the pressure a little bit and work your way around till you've got it pretty much 360 degrees. What I'm going to do now then is just make sure my thread's spun up and corded. I'm going to pull tight, just wind back a little bit, pull tight again, and then have a look. So for this first time point, you're not wanting the bucktail to flare too much, but I know that with use and everything like that, it is probably going to flatten down a little bit. Fairly happy with where that's sitting for the fly that we're tying today. And then I'm just going to wind forward. So I've gone forward about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch from the tie-in point, maybe a little further. Right, so then I'm just going to swing my vise back in and hold that in place. Bucktail loves to be stroked. You can just run it through and twist it, make sure everything's there. Then I like to, bearing in mind you're going to have all these exposed threads between all your tying points, just a quick little hit of super glue. We're going to find ourselves another similar piece, can be slightly shorter. Again, I'm going from the bottom end of the tail, which is typically a little bit more hollow, because I'm actually wanting to now use that really skinny thread to create a bit of flare in the next tying point. I want it to sit a little bit wider than the first tying point. Again, clean out your butts a little bit. And we're just tying this one in regular direction. We're not hollow tying yet. So the first 2, I'm just going to tie in regular way, make sure that super glue is all dried. Let's take this out of the way so you can see what's going on. So again, tips facing backwards. And I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 around. Get your thumbnail in there. Do your best to push it as much as you can, 360. I'm now going to take one more wrap right at the back of my wraps, and I'm going to now pull down as tight as I can, and then take 2 reps forward, 3 reps forward. So now what's happened is that bucktail is now flared a little more than the first tying point. So we're starting to build profile and bulk as we go forward. Generally when tying these things, you got to kind of trust the process a little bit, because you're invariably going to think, oh, it's too wild, it's too sort of broad, there's too much flare. The bucktail will lay down, and I'm going to show you a trick at the end of the video as well, just how to shape the bucktail and get it to where you want. But I'm going to be pretty happy with where that is for now. I'll come in and just lock in those forward butt points. Again, come in with your super glue. I find it's much easier to use a brush application super glue for this. You don't need a lot, but it just gives you a bit more accuracy. I'm going to add some flash. Typically tying these, anything with bucktail, I prefer to tie with a flat light flash, so something like this, which is this is side-ice saltwater angel hair, but anything similar to this, or even flashaboo, rather than flashes like crystal flash would tend to mat up in the bucktail. This I'm just going to literally pull out a clump of it and basically get it roughly 50-50. It does look like a bit of a mess when it's in hand, but all I'm going to do is 50-50 this. So I'm on this, so it's tied 50-50 down one side. Because it's nice and light, I'm not worried about it clumping or getting fold the other side back. So now I've got roughly the same amount going down both sides of the fly. Then again, I'm going to wind forward. What I also like, the advantage of being able to tie in hand, is you can turn it, look at it, make sure all of your pieces are where they should be. So you very much a 360-degree fly, so you're wanting to make sure you get to look at it at all angles. We've taken 4-inch bucktail and made it 7-inch bucktail. We're going to do one more tie-in point. It'll be the first of our reverse ties. So the next one will be a hollow tie. And we're sticking with the white, again going fairly long. You can shorten the bucktail a little bit as you go forward. Typically what I like to do is use the longest bucktail that I have kind of around the middle of the fly, and then get shorter as you go towards the front, depending on the profile that you're trying to build. So again, now I've cleaned out even less of the shorter pieces on this. I'm less worried about all the bucktail being the same length. And what we do now is we're going to tie it in reverse, and we're going to bullet tie this. So just like we did before, 1, 2, 3 wraps, and I'm just going to push that down, get that nice and evenly spread. I'm not too worried about having these longer butts out there. I'll show you why. I don't trim them. You can if you want, but to be honest, I don't. So where we are there now, I've got everything kind of 360'd. I'm going to spin your bobbin so it's nice, and we're going to squeeze that nice and tight. You can see the bucktail's flaring nicely. What I'm going to do now is wind back towards the tail end of the fly, so I'm winding towards my fingers, and I'm creating a little flat spot of thread. Right there. So the end where my thread is now is, instead of being on this end right up against this side, it's now situated on the end of the butts right there. So the reason for that is we're going to bullet tie this rather than thread dam tie it, and this is where this skinny thread really comes into its own. Take your push tool, very fancy old pen, and you want to give this a couple whacks. What that does is it also helps spread the bucktail out nicely. Have a look at it from the front, make sure all your angles are right. Yeah, get in there. Now, what you want to do then is just push that through. So this is where having a slightly longer section of mono, the fluoro that you're tying on, because I'm holding it in my right hand over here, it'll just hold it in there. I can actually move those materials around to get them where I want them to be. Push this down, and now you want to pull these back as hard as you can. So the trick here is that now the thread is actually, it's not in the front here, it's back a little bit. The reason for that is I now want to bullet tie, which means I'm going to tie over the bucktail rather than thread damming it. So I'm going to take 1, 2 loose wraps around there, kind of have a look, make sure I don't have too many gaps anywhere. And now again, spin your thread, and this is where the skinny stuff comes in. And then I'm going to pull that pretty damn tight. Then I'll take 1, 2 wraps going forward, and then I'll wrap down onto the mono just to lock it off. And now the review. So now what you can see is it's now flared even more. So it's a lot quicker than using the traditional thread dam on sort of beast flies or mono extension flies. I like it as well because it doesn't slip. found tying on like softer mono when it bends around and whatnot after you've done all your precious tying points, it can slip and suddenly you get a piece of bucktail that sticks out all wonky. So you can kind of get that to where you want it to be. Lock a few more in there. You'll find invariably it almost naturally will start taking on a shape, like there'll definitely be a top and a bottom depending on the style of the fly you're tying. I mean, typically things are going to be dorsal, especially towards the back of the fly rather than super round. And it just the way you handle it in your hands, it tends to start picking a top and bottom all on its own. So I think I kind of got it where I want it to be, top and bottom. Safety that with a little bit of super glue. What I really like about these as well is that you, with that bullet tie point, it's tied in twice, which makes it incredibly tough. There's very little chance of that bucktail going anywhere. We are going to add hackles, just for shits and giggles, because they look pretty. I've already pre-selected these. So we're going to go with 3, one on each shoulder, and then one over the top. So what I've done is, these are fairly long and soft. Ideally, I've left the flue and the stiffer butt section in just to make it less chance of wrapping, and they also are a lot easier to tie in. What I like to do on these is tie almost in a, like I say, in a shoulder section. So I'm going to tie 3, the 2 on the side are not going to be quite on the side, and they're going to be angled ever so slightly upwards. So I'm just going to come in here, I'm going to angle them down at about not quite 45 degrees. A couple loose wraps, one on each side. So it's pretty difficult to show this in camera because I kind of need all my fingers and hands in there while I'm doing it. So I'm just going to try and match the angle. You can see on there that I've got the hackles kind of going a little bit up and backwards. So matching those angles. Tie the second one in here. Not wrapping super tight at this point because I'm probably going to have to move them a little bit. Also like them to flare ever so slightly. You're also going to be using the bucktail to push those out. On the right hand side it's a bit high. And I kind of want them running together like that. So I'm happy with where those 2 are. I'm going to lock those in. Third one, which goes over the top. Personally, I just like that one to be slightly longer if I can. This one's probably going to be pretty much similar length. And we're going to tie that right in the middle on the top. Again, a little bit tricky to get this where you want it. So loose wraps again. And that's kind of where I want it to be. And then try not to shift it too much. Cool, so once I've got this kind of where I want it, it'll go back in the vise. And while it's in the vise now, I can use both hands, pull these hackles out, pull the top hackle up, get them to where I want them. I kind of want it to be a little halo over the top of the fly, or the back end of the fly. And then I'm going to come in there with, while they're at the angle that I want, and super glue that, keep it all safe. Pulled out another little bit of flash, and do the same as I did before. Just lay it on the side. It's just creating a little bit of an inner glow at the back end there. Flatten those all down. Right, so we're finished up there, we're flashed up. So basically what I'm going to do now is just come along and just trim this off a bit, give yourself about an inch or so from the end, and just whip finish that quickly. And there's your extension. So now essentially we are starting to work with bucktail that is that long. Helps give you a lot of movement at the back, and Just looks like a... Add one more drop of super glue to that quickly, just to seal in that tie point. Okay, so we're going to go back, we're going on to our vise. We are tying this on a Arex SA270 in 5/0. Beautiful hooks these, really love them. So we're finished with our extension. And just lay that down for a second. Get your thread base laid down. There is the chance when you're tying right up at the front that your thread slips through that little gap. So what I like to do before I start is I build up right at the nexus here, build up a bit of a thread base, try and seal in, create a solid point there, just for when I'm tying the last finishing points of the fleye. I want to be able to tie right up against the eye without my thread slipping through. And just wrap back, typically wrap back to just where the hook starts bending, and I'm just going to create a little bit of a bump at the bend. What I'm trying to do is just extend the straight flat part. When I tie the extension in, I don't want it to be pointing downwards, I rather want it to ramp up a little bit, so just a tiny little bump there. Now we're going to take our extension and sort of gauge out distance wise where we want it to be, knowing of where our next tying point is going to be. So that's probably about right for me at this point. So taking a look at that, I'm going to trim this fairly short. Cut that end off. Take your lighter and just, well, make sure you got it straight so you know where your top end is. Hold it vertically, and I'm going to ball that tag end, and I'm just going to flatten the bottom. That creates a flat line where it can tie in. Place that into your vise, just do a couple of wraps. Get it kind of where you want it. Make sure that everything is straight before you lock it down. Obviously you want this to be attached fairly well. It doesn't have a hook in it or anything like that, so it's never going to take any pressure, so that's not going to be the end of the world, but you want it to be attached nice and tightly. So a couple nice tight wraps. Your good friend Mr. Super Glue again. Now we're going to move on to the next tie point. So looking at where the other one is, I'm basically going to start it right about there. Okay. Okay, so this, I'm looking for the longest stuff I can find here. Not absolutely essential, but if you've got it, use it. I also like a fairly heavy clump of bucktail at this point. It's probably the heaviest of them all. Again, we're just still sticking with white. This is basically, this point is going to be the shoulders of the fleye. So I've gone with the fairly thick section of bucktail. You just clean out the fluff. So we're sticking with hollow tying again. Place that right on top. Spin up. We're going to go 1, 2, 3 wraps again. Once you've got everything 360, very importantly when tying with bucktail, specifically when you're tying hollow flies and hollow, is to make sure that your thread wraps are 90 degrees to the shank, because you don't want uneven ends on the front. So now I'm right at the front of this, where the thread's wrapped. I'm going to pull nice and tight. And you can see the bucktail flaring nicely. Again, come in here and make sure it's spread nice and evenly around the hook. So I use a bigger, wider one. Same principle again, always give it a couple of whacks. Make sure everything's spread around nicely. So the difference now is we're going to go and tie in a traditional thread dam. So instead of my thread currently being at the back of the tying point near the butts, it's right up against the front, and I've tried to create a straighter edge at the front as possible. I want that nice and even. Pull all the fibers backwards, nice and evenly. What you want to try and make sure you're doing now is not twisting any of the fibers. They're all coming as straight back as possible. Pull your thread through, And now we're going to start building up the thread dam. I'm laying down those threads in in front of the bucktail, not over it as with the bullet tyers. And see where you get to. So now you can see we've spread pretty broad here. Again, this will, once the fly's wet and hung and dried, it's all going to start laying back a little better, a little more evenly. And I'm just going to now super glue that thread down to prevent any slipping. Right, wind forward again. I'm going to go just in front of this little bump, and we're going to start with our first dorsal color. We're just going with a very light sort of sand tan on the top. We are going to be bullet tying again now. So the bucktail that I'm looking for now, I don't want this super hollow stuff. I don't want it to flare and be too wild. I'm going for something slightly more crinkly, I guess almost from the sort of center point of a tail. So on the top, I'm going with fairly straight, softer tips. I haven't cleaned much out of the butt other than the fluff here, because I still want it to flare, but I've kept the shorter parts in there. We're going to reverse tie this again. And this is going to stay just on the top of the flye. 3 wraps. Now kind of like what you do with, if you tie with deer hair, you can kind of put your thumb underneath or just hold the fibers on either side and then pull down just to lock it in place. You can go back and clean off these butt ends. I kind of like leaving them there. It adds a little bit of bulk to the core of the fly. It's almost like a mini bulkhead. I'm probably going to change bucktails for the belly. I'm now wanting something a little bit softer than that longer, straighter stuff that I've got. This has got slightly softer tips. So now you can see we're going fairly short and crinkly. Clean that out. Right, same thing on the bottom. So we are bullet tying again this time. So I'm going to create that flat spot with the thread. My thread is now at the back of the tying point. Come in with our push tool again. I'm going to come up over the top. 1, 2, and pull tight. Just lock that in a bit more in the front of. You're happy with where that is. Super glue all the way around. Spacing is obviously something that's quite important. Typically you're wanting to get your spacing closer together towards where you go to the front of the fly. This is going to create density and bulk, which is going to, in hydrodynamics and things, is going to create more wash and movement over the back of the fly, which is going to give you more movement in the back end. We will go with the tan again. I'm not going to clean out any of these little uneven ones. All I'm taking out is the shitty fluff at the bottom. Again, we're going tan on top, 3 wraps, 1, 2, 3. Go back to our slightly softer bucktail. Same again, just get it nice and even. I'll probably add in one more bit of flash here. Just going to lay that in over the top. Push that all back together with the bucktail. Again, now we are thread damming, not bullet tying this one. I know we're going backwards and forwards. I've just found that the first point on the hook, I like to do a thread dam once we've tied the extension in. Everything up until the second last one, I like to do bullets, and then that second last one I like to do as a thread dam. It just seems to create the right shape. So our thread is at the front of the tying point now. Push back again, get a good whack, and then just start winding in the front just to lock that in a bit. And now what I'll do is I'll work that, get that bucktail to bend where I want it to. You can use your fingernail, make sure this front edge is nice and straight. So quite importantly, what you'll notice is the spacing that I have at the front, in front of this tie-in point, to finish off my last tie point. I'm building up that thread dam. I'm stopping fairly often. At this point I want this to be pretty wide. It is going to lay down, certainly wider than you think you need it to be. So looking at that, just grab a comb and just brush that flash out so that we're making sure that none of that's clumping the bucktail. Good friend super glue again. Right, so to finish this off, basically to give us this colorway, we're going to go with a sort of dirty olive for the last tie on the dorsal. And my favorite color, which I wish I had more of, is this sort of peppermint, seafoam, turquoise, fairly long, soft fiber. So I'm going to probably trim off about 1 centimeter's worth of this. I'm going to go as far forward as I can, right up against the eye. 3 wraps. And then I'm going to wrap back a little bit, again to create that little ramp. This is one of the few places where I do trim the butts out because I don't want that hard flare to interfere with my next tying point when I fold everything back. So I'm just going to come through and trim these butts out. I'm going to come and grab a piece of this green. These I'm going to taper these butts a little bit because these I'm not going to trim out. So this section is slightly thicker than the one on the top. I am going to put the butts back a little bit there. One, two, 3 loose wraps. Right, so we're going to push these fibers back in 2 different stages now. I'm going to do the top first because I'm going to bullet tie the top, and then I'm going to thread dam tie the bottom. What this does gives you a nice clean finish on the top, but it keeps that nice belly profile. So try to grab up all the olive fibers that you can, straight over the top. 2 wraps. What we're going to do now for the bottom is go to regular thread dam because that's going to fill this belly out. Again with this, push back, just try to get it nice and even. Use your thumbnail to make sure you got a nice clean edge in the front. So now I'm thread damming the underside. What I do is typically when I tie these, I don't add eyes, I don't glue them or anything at this point. I'm going to wet this down and then I'll show you another little trick just to help shape. And you don't want to over build up thread there unnecessarily. So I'm going to finish that where it is. Right, so that's basically the finished shape. There's probably a little bit too much flare on the belly, but what we're going to do now is go and give the flour wet down. Right, so our flour's had a swim. As you can see, it shows the nice teardrop shape of the flour, and basically what we want to do is get it to hold that shape. So what I do is while it's still wet, take your hairdryer. Ideally you want to find someone that has a high heat but a low blast. Basically what that's going to do is I'm going to start on the highest heat possible, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit it straight from the front and just let it sit there for a while. So what you can see now is that's basically, with that heat and water, it's basically almost steam shaped the bucktail. So of course it's a little bit of a cheat, it will spring back again, but what it can now, instead of wetting the flour, letting it hang dry overnight, which I still will do, this gives me the ability to come and look and go, okay, maybe I do need to add a few more wraps, you know, somewhere if it's flaring out a little bit too much, or if I'm happy with it, I can now go ahead and either add like a little drop of super glue to lock that all in, or if I'm going to add eyes to this pattern, I'd go ahead and add those now. It's probably about 20 centimeters. And that's pretty much it. So that way, using pretty standard bucktail, you're able to get this beautiful long wispy tail end of the flour, plenty of movement, lots of bulk up front. You know, bucktail colors are endless, so you can mix and match, do whatever you want to do. Chuck some eyes on it if you want, or don't. and go catch some fish. Thanks for watching.